Hi, teacher poets. We are officially live here during our very first session together for our 2015 cohort of teacher poets. And I have to tell you, I always, leading up to a day like this, I always feel a little bit nervous, a little bit excited, a little bit, is everything together? Are we ready to go? But really, once I met our new cohort here, and especially as we're getting ready to write together, I am really, really excited. So Teacher Poets is a group of educators that are all meeting together. We'll meet together this year over 3 Saturdays, this Saturday, next Saturday, and then the 25th of April as well, so 3 in a row. And we will be reading some published poems together, we'll be writing poetry together, and we also, during each of our sessions, will be workshopping some poems together as well. Teacher Poets is a adult poetry workshop, so all of us are writing for ourselves and for each other. And ultimately, as we work on our own writing, it helps us to be better teachers of writing too. But that said, we're really here together just as a creative writing group working together. So if we haven't met before, I'm Chris Lehman. I'm the founding director of the Educator Collaborative, and I am a quiet on the side poet as well. I almost double majored in poetry as an undergrad because I took so many classes in it, and I just really, really love to read and write it as well, though I don't publish it anywhere, and it's all very personal and quiet. But an event like this, it helps me to make some time to write and really just reconnect with that part of myself that I really love and enjoy. So the first things first, we should get to know our new members here. We also, those of you that have joined us before, will see one familiar face. There's Margaret, who will reintroduce herself as well. She was a member of the 2014 Teacher Poets cohort. During each of these 3 sessions, one of our 2014 members is going to come along and be a special guest for our session. Let's get started. For those of you on the bottom, any one of you can go. You can unmute your mic. We have, by the way, everyone, a awesome group and an international group too. So you're going to hear from some people from lots of different places today. So teacher poets, go ahead and introduce yourselves. I told them here's the awkward silent part while you decide who'll go first.
Will I start and get things going?
Sure.
Okay, so I am Leanne Wright-Gray. I am originally from Ontario in Canada, and I'm coming to you today from the Cayman Islands, where I have been living for the last 17 years. It's hard to believe that. I teach at Cayman International School here, which is a really great private school. In that school, I've taught high school English. I have been a librarian, and I'm currently doing instructional coaching and a little bit of curriculum development for them. So I'm really excited. It's been a long time since I wrote any poetry, so I'm excited about doing that again and meeting all of you. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself now.
Okay, bye, Leanne. Thank you. And Leanne did say, as we were getting to know each other earlier on, I asked, so should we be jealous that you live in the Cayman Islands? And she said, yeah, you probably should. So thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Jancy Clark, and I am originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, but for the past 5 years have been living in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And for the past 5 years, I taught 5th grade at an American international school here in Riyadh. And this year, I am the instructional coach for elementary K-5, and it has been just a dream job. I love it. And this is a great opportunity because I was an English major, loved writing poetry, but somehow never find the time for it anymore. So thank you.
Thank you, Jancy. And so no one's worried. It's late afternoon, but not too late over by you right now, right?
Yeah, not too late.
Okay, good.
So I'll go next.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Susanna Sedlak, and I currently live in New Fairfield, Connecticut, which is in the Northeast. I actually am not from the United States originally. I was born and for a bunch of years of my early life lived in Portugal with my family. So part of my own experience as an immigrant person has been to sort of assimilate and live half in the United States culture and half in my own culture as I grew up. So that kind of gives me an interesting perspective sometimes of the world. And so while I live here in New Fairfield, I have 2 children who remind me to laugh every single day. I teach English language arts at Middlebrook School in Wilton, Connecticut. And I was an English major in college, and joining this group is really my way of finding time to write.
Awesome, and I didn't know that about you, Sue. Sue and I have been lucky enough to work together, and she is an awesome teacher, and now I know even more about you.
Okay, should I go?
Jen, sure.
Okay. So I'm Jen Wood. I am a teacher, 7th and 8th grade English in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it's earlier here. I studied English at UVA, so I've always, 100 years ago when I was in college, and I've always loved poetry. So I want to try and find more time to write. I'm also a mom. I have a almost 20-year-old, 18-year-old, and a 13-year-old. So I'm lucky. And we try and read as much as possible. But I really want to bring poetry more into my class. And kids, especially middle schoolers, actually love to read and write poetry. So that's why I'm here.
Absolutely. And I mean, first I have to say, so you had your children when you were 2, obviously. and hooray for middle school. Yes, yeah.
I love middle school.
And our special guest, Margaret, would you like to say hi?
Hi, I'm Margaret Garrett. I am in Texas. I'm also international. I grew up in Mexico City, so it's interesting to see everyone from all over. I'm a junior high librarian, and like Chris said, I was in the cohort last year, 2014. I've been writing poetry just for about a year and a half, so I was a newbie last year, and I'm a little not so new this year, but still new.
Do you have any tips for us?
It's great to be here. Just, do the assignments, come on, and it's just a great experience to get, a variety of experiences. And it focuses you, and you'll be writing all day Saturday. That's what I did last year.
Awesome, thank you, Margaret. And I had the same experience too. It was like this was a very good excuse to do what I actually really like to do. So I'm so happy to have all of you here. This is really, really exciting. So a couple of logistics and announcements before we get started here. So the first is, again, we're going to meet the next 3 Saturdays, the 11th, 18th, and 25th from 11 to noon Eastern. Then if you haven't already and you'd like to, you can join our Teacher Poets Google Plus community page. You can scan that link or type that into your browser, or just search for Teacher Poets Google Plus, and you'll be able to find our page. There, people are sharing their own poems. It's a place where many people last year and already this year are sharing ideas. They're working on assignments there that we're doing. You also can share other poems that you love. It really is just a place to come together as teachers and share our own love of poetry. So our assignment each week, I'll be posting assignments on our website. So this was the assignment that went up it was actually Thursday, so it was late by day, but this last Thursday. You can find the assignment and all the following assignments on our blog, community.theeducatorcollaborative.com/blog, and you'll see our writing invitations, the mentor poem suggestions to read, and then ways that you can get set up for our workshop each day. So the writing invitation for this week was just to go to our Google Plus page and to post where you get your own writing inspiration, or you could add that as a comment on the blog post well. And so that still is open to everyone. So at any point, if you'd like to, I posted there as well ways that you find writing inspiration. Also, if you go to that same blog post, you'll see some mentor poems that we suggested that you read this week. A Weakness for Boleros and Skater are both posted there, and we'll talk a little bit more about those and about everything in a second. Then the last and the most important is if you haven't had a chance to do it yet, there still is a little bit of time. You have about 15 minutes to do it. If you go to the blog, you go to assignment 1, you'll find a poem by Ruth L. Schwartz called The Swan at Edgewater Park. You'll find the direct link for that. And that is what we will be using during our workshop later. We'll be practicing with a published poet's poem just so we can get the feel for what it feels like to workshop a poem together. And then this is the same work that we'll do then in each of the following weeks. So we'll workshop this poem together a bit later, and then for the next following weeks we'll actually have published original poems by our teacher poets that we'll workshop as well. So if you haven't had a chance, if you're joining us from at home, you can check that out too. The other really important thing to know, we'll get to that in a second, is you can talk with us too. So if you are at home and you're watching along with us, which actually I see some people are right now, like Leah's watching along. Here's Leah. Hi, Leah. If you're watching along with us, you can tweet along, and we'll be bringing in some of those tweets into our conversation as we go. So you can just use #TeacherPoets, and there'll be several times where we're talking together or where we'll invite you to share some ideas too. And so have those come up and go along, and we will bring those into our conversation as we work together today. So if you are getting ready to tweet along in a bit as well, make sure that you are checking out that poem, and then you can prepare yourself by thinking about these 3 things. And again, we're practicing with a published poet's poem, and then starting next week we'll have poets from our group. We'll work with them too. So you can read and mark it up for compliments. What are things about this poem, lines that you love, ideas that you love, the title that you love, whatever, some compliments. You can mark it up with questions. What are things that you're wondering or maybe aren't so clear to you, or that you wish you knew a little more about, or maybe you didn't want to know as much about? So questions that you have. And then the third step, we'll think about considerations. So while we can't write the poem for the poet, it's really every poet owns their own poem. What we can do is just offer some considerations of things that they might think about as they're going to revise and to work. Okay, so now we'll jump into our very first Teacher Poet session together. All of our sessions will happen in 2 big parts. One is we'll do some writing together, and I'll share a strategy with you, and then we'll do some workshopping at the end. So today's strategy is tell it like it is. So let's get started on that. So one thing that I talked about last year, and I think is an important way to start any writing work that we're doing, and this is helpful for us as adult poets, but I think it's helpful for our kids too, is to think about this. When we think about poems, I know that I, as an amateur poet, I think many of us as amateur poets, especially in the beginning, we tend to think of poetry as this, deeply personal, deep inside of your soul, and very mysterious kind of an art form. I got some advice, though. I've gotten advice from poet friends of mine and from mentors, but I got some advice recently as well that I picked up at a conference that I think is very, very helpful. It's this. Heather Rocco, a good friend of mine, invited me to the Dodge Poetry Festival that happens here in the Northeast. If you haven't gone to the Dodge Poetry Festival and you're anywhere in the Northeast or can get here in the spring, it's totally worth going because it's a couple of days of all of your poetry, like superstars, these amazing poets, and a bunch of poets that maybe you haven't met before or you aren't familiar with, all in the same place, doing readings, having panels. It was really, really awesome for a poetry nerd like me. So one of the awesome moments was I was in this not too big, gymnasium-sized room with Billy Collins, who was presenting. And because the Dodge Poetry Festival is so familiar, you run into poets all the time. So I got to shake Billy Collins' hand, and I will never wash this hand again. It was very exciting. I got to meet Billy Collins. So Billy, during one of his sessions, said this. He said, "The thing we have to think about with our poetry, if you are a writer, is that while you assume poetry is about you, it is not. Readers don't care about you." He said, readers don't care about you. readers care about poetry. And then he said this. He said, so the thing we have to make sure we do is that we think a little bit about ourselves, but we think a lot about what our readers will experience. We think a lot about what it'll feel like to them when they read. Because remember, they don't care about you, they care about poetry. And then he gave this tip. He said, if, for example, you're writing about your relationship with your mother, the relationship with your mother is probably already mysterious. Don't make it more mysterious than it has to be. So here is a strategy to help you not make your poetry too mysterious. So I'm going to flip over to my document camera, and we'll do some writing together over here. Okay, here we go. So to help yourself not make your poems too mysterious, one thing you can do is to begin with truth. To really start with your main aim is, I want to write in a way that expresses exactly what I'm trying to say first. So one way to do that is to not start with a poem. Instead of getting your pen ready and starting to write an actual poem, you can instead think of it as an entry, like a journal entry that you might write first. So I'm going to try this a little bit with you. I've prepped some examples so I don't have to write too much over here as well, but I'm going to start this a little bit with you here. So if I'm trying to write like an entry, not like a poem at first, I first can ask myself, what are some things that are true in my life right now? And they could be things that I worry about or things that I think a lot about. If you want a good strategy for that, you can look back to session 1 from last Teacher Poets, where we talked about taking big categories and making them smaller. So that's one way to do it. So I've already zeroed in on one area that I'd like to do some writing about. And so that area is this: homework. And in particular, my children doing their homework. So my kids are 5 and 7, and I have rethought the way I feel about homework as a teacher now that I am a parent at home. I see some of you smiling and laughing. Now that I'm a parent at home, watching my children do homework. So one area is homework. And so I'm going to write an entry that I'm going to just say it. I'm not going to be mysterious. I'm not going to write it like a poem. Instead, I'm just going to say what's going on with me and my kids in homework right now. And my aim is to try to be really honest. Okay, so let's try this out. All right, this is a little therapy session for the world. Okay, I wish I did not get so annoyed. I'm sorry, so annoyed while my daughter, she's our 7-year-old, while my daughter does her math homework. I recognize that she is only 7, is only 7, and math is challenging. However, so I'm going to just say a little bit more of what I could write here, but I could say, and I recognize that math is challenging for most of us. However, it seems to be really hard for her. And instead of being a patient parent, instead of being someone who, thank you for laughing along with me, instead of being a patient parent, instead of being someone who recognizes that, just like her teacher explained, the new way math is taught works on concepts first, and those ideas will come across time, I many nights can get so annoyed, even angry, if she isn't understanding. I get frustrated and say things like, how many quarters go into $1? How come you don't know that? And so I could write on and on from there. So I have an example here that I just started just to show you the next step. So I could write an entry where I'm not trying to be poetic. Instead, I'm just trying to write. Oh, someone's saying you're not seeing the document. Are you supposed to see it? Can you see the document camera okay? Now you can. Okay, good, great. So I'm just doing some writing. So I'm going to write it out. But now from here, I can move into now turning this into a poem or starting to revise this with some more craft. So I'm starting with honesty first. I'm starting with not being mysterious. I'm just telling it like it is. So then here's some steps I can take. The next is I can take the actual entry that I have and just start adding line breaks. So I could say, let's see, I wish I did not get so annoyed. Maybe that's a good break. While my daughter does her math homework. I wish I did not get so annoyed. Break. While my daughter does her math homework. Break. I recognize, break, that she is only 7. Break. And math is challenging for most of us. Break. And just like her teacher explained, break. So I can go through an entry that I've written, and again, this entry is trying to be really just telling it like it is, and I can start putting line breaks. Then I can recopy that poem. Every time I get to a line break, I'll just move to the next line. So I've actually started to do that here. I wish I did not get so annoyed by my daughter does her homework. I recognize she's only 7 and math is challenging. So this very honest, true, tell it like it is entry is now starting to turn into a poem. As you revise in this way, you can start giving yourself permission to revise pieces of it. And my suggestion the first time out is don't revise all of it, right? Like don't start writing like instead of saying, I wish my daughter, being like, the puppy in the field was lost and suddenly, you know, like there's a way where that can happen with poetry, but our readers need help. Our readers need to know where they're going. So I could go back in and look for some inspiration in my own lines. So one thing that I did as I was revising this a bit myself is I was writing. I got to this line. I remember something as foolish. I can't get angry when I remember something as foolish as how many quarters go into $1. And I thought, I like that line, quarters into $1. So I lifted that line to start a new poem. So now when I'm revising a third time, so this time was writing my entry, then dividing up the lines, then that became just basically my entry with line breaks. But now as I move into a new revision, I'm going to start lifting out things that I found really compelling and try those out. So here's a new version that I started, quarters into $1. I get so annoyed when my daughter does her math homework. So there I'm being honest, straight out, right up front. And like Billy Collins, when he was talking about that, you know, when he said the relationship with your mother's already mysterious, don't make it mysterious. His suggestion was that he was like, just come out and tell us that it's about your mom, and then tell us the rest of the poem. So here I'm trying that. I'm just coming right out and telling. But then as I was beginning to write some more, I thought about this quarters into $1, and so I started to just play around. So here's a start at that. There are 4, so I thought there's 4 quarters. There are 4 hours in the afternoon we legitimately have together. She's only 7, I tell myself, and middle school minus 2nd grade is not as far as it seems. And then here's just some of what I saved from before. So as I'm rewriting, now I'm starting to play around a bit. Like now I'm giving myself permission to say, well, what if I toyed around with the idea of math and I tried to bring that in over and over again? Or what if I played around with the number of lines that there were in a stanza? Or now I could play around with metaphor a bit more. But what feels important is that we're starting with saying what it really is. We're starting with like, what's the thing that I really want to write about first? And then bring that into our poem versus starting with a mystery the first time out. Because again, if it feels too mysterious, your readers might just stop reading. That was one more thing that Billy said during that talk, is he said the number of poems that don't get read past the first stanza is very high. He had I don't think he had any clear statistics on that, but it was a good point that it's like we have to think about not just writing for ourselves, which honestly I think is the first way we write. I think we always write for ourselves first, but we also have to think about that second step of writing for our audience and the sorts of things that they'll need. And I see a bunch of you are tweeting. I'll bring up your tweets in a second. Those of you at home and my teacher poet friends here on the bottom too, I'd love to have us just take a couple of minutes here and to try this out, to try writing a little bit about something true, saying what's something in my life right now, it could be a big thing, it could be a small thing, it could be something you're angry about or happy about or a celebration, whatever it is. Could you try writing a little bit about something true? And I think in our few minutes here, you might just write a couple of sentences. Then I'd love for you to go back and look for where some of those line breaks could come in. I'm going to, while you're started, so teacher, poet, friends here, and those of you at home, you can go ahead and get started with that. Then I'm going to bring in a couple of tweets that are happening over here. Those of you that are online tweeting to us, you could do this too. And then why don't you tweet to us a line or a sentence from what you're just gathering for yourselves. So here are a couple things that are coming from online. So first here is Christy, who I think if this is working, you should see her up here, although I'm not seeing her up here. Maybe you can see her right now, and if not, I'll have to flip something. But I'll say that Christy C. Rush Levine online is saying begin with truth. We have another Christy who's joining us who says, I'm sitting in my PJs attending this session from Malaysia. Oh, hi, from Malaysia. Thanks for joining us, too. We really are an international group here today. Here is Betsy. Oh, Betsy will be joining us 2 weeks. Betsy was one of our teacher poet friends from last year, and so she'll be a special guest like Margaret in 2 weeks with us. And so Betsy is shouting out with an exclamation point, start with truth and don't make it too mysterious. 100% agreed. And we have, and Jancy is not only live with us, but she's tweeting too. Jancy's also saying, if it feels too mysterious, your reader might stop reading. So if you are online with us on Twitter or teacher poet friends that are down here at the bottom as well, I'd love for you to share a line or a sentence or just how this experience is going for you. So if you're on Twitter, feel free to share a couple of thoughts using the hashtag teacherpoets. You also could just share a line that you've lifted out from your entry. And teacher poets that are live here with us, does anyone have a line you'd like to share or just a reflection that you'd like to share? Make sure you just unmute your mic when you jump on.
Okay, can I jump on?
Sure.
Okay, so having just come back from my little beach vacation on the other side of the island, what I had in mind was I wrote, I wish I could keep in my mind the small, beautiful moments I experience in my life. And that kind of came in mind from our chat this morning about how, although I live in this beautiful place, and we all live in beautiful places, that once I'm in the work week, I forget where I live. Mm-hmm. And that really struck me this weekend, just doing simple things like sitting on the beach, looking at the water in the mornings, and you have that really emotional connection. And so when I wrote, I wish I could keep in my mind the small, beautiful moments, it's just that really emotional connection that you can have with the natural world that we all experience when we have a quiet moment, but we forget about it or we let it slip away when we're busy. And so that's kind of, I like that little phrase, small, beautiful moments, because those are the things in life that really get at the heart of living, right?
Yeah, and I have to say that when you read that whole line, I wish I could keep in my mind, it already sounds like a poem. I mean, part of it is we're like all here together writing poetry, so it kind of sounds, everything sounds like a poem now, but there's also, because you're being so specific and clear, I feel like I right away had a connection to it. You know, when you said, like, you know, I wish I could hold in my mind because during the work week it all goes away. Yeah. Now I feel like I'm right there with you, so whatever else you're writing, I'm going to be on that journey with you. I'm not trying to figure out where we are. Like, I feel really connected to that idea. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Okay, I'm muting.
Sure. Here's, I'll have one of you jump on in a second, but we have Leah, who's writing about something true, ear infections, too much iPad time, Minecraft. She has a list going of all the true things that she'd like to write about. Okay, anyone else who has something to share?
I'll share. I wrote, or actually I'm thinking about writing, only because last night was just a perfect example of this happening where I have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old next week, and putting my 3-year-old to bed every night for the past month has been torturous. And while I know that, you know, I should be cherishing those moments of putting him to bed, instead it's as soon as I start clearing up the dishes from dinner, my gut just begins to churn at the thought of knowing that in a little while I'm going to have to get him to bed and to sleep by a certain time. And it's almost like an alarm clock that goes off. And if at 8 o'clock he is not asleep, the stress level just bubbles up. So I think I want to kind of focus in on that as I'm writing.
And what's nice about that, first it reminds me of my good friend and teacher poet member from last year, Audra Robb, who is a beautiful poet herself. She talks a lot about one strategy of like looking for contrasts, and that contrast can really help you write important poems, or they can help you write important narratives or important essays. And so I love how in the story that you're telling, there's that contrast of, gosh, I love my child so much, and what a special moment this is, and I just want to die. The fact that bedtime is coming. And I think it's those, like, finding those contrasting moments, or finding just a whatever moment, but looking for the contrast in them, that again is a way that helps us all feel how real the writing is, and helps us as readers connect to it. Because I know I can picture that poem of it being this like worry, worry, complain, complain, worry, 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 and I know that turn can come in that's like, oh, but look, he's asleep, how beautiful, like whatever the turn is, that I think will have such a big emotional impact because it's being so true. So thank you for sharing that. How about one more, if anyone would like to share?
Mute. So I was visiting a friend last week, and she has 2 younger kids, and I have, as I said, 3 older kids, and she pulled this crumpled note from the child's school that said they wanted her to describe their family's mindfulness practice. And we just burst out laughing because, yeah, we don't have that. We don't have that moment. And just it made me think about how cluttered my mind gets during the week, trying to balance everything. And it's somehow, the worries between home and all my students and being the best parent and teacher I can be, how somehow my brain is so cluttered. And I think of just piles of files, and so trying to describe how to filter through all of that. So no mindfulness practice, but just how to be quiet for a few minutes and not worry, which I think, it's hard to describe, but the picture in my mind I have.
Yeah, and I think what I wonder if while you're writing, you might try a couple different versions, and one of them, I bet, has all of those parts exactly as you described it, of like the crumpled notes, the incredible laughter, and then the realization of like, oh, well, actually, that probably is a problem that I don't make time for that. And again, I love that you're being so specific. Like you're saying, here's the thing that actually happened. And I think starting with that, not just in how we're planning, but starting with that in how we're actually writing, at least the first couple of drafts, can help us hold on to that really clear, specific idea that we're trying to say. I oftentimes think that through the process of our writing, we can add craft and get clever as long as we're starting with a really strong, clear scaffolding first. So it can go somewhere after that, but I think we have to start with something that feels really concrete. So thank you to all of you sharing, and to those of you online too. Betsy's saying she loves to write poems in this way, and are we in her head right now? Maybe we are. And then Leanne, who's with us but also tweeting as well, I love this. She says, Ted Hughes says, teachers should not teach how to write, but how to try to say what you really mean. I love that. So my invitation, and we'll post this at the end, is that you start and create some poems at home, and we'll do it here too, using a strategy like this, thinking about what you really, really are trying to say, and perhaps starting not with the poem, but with an entry first. And now part of the trick too is that that entry also has to be really specific, clear, and honest as well. If your entry feels poetic and kind of mysterious, it's not going to pay off. So you really want to push yourself to say, what is really happening? What is the thing that I'm really dealing with? Okay, so we, during each of our sessions, start with a writing strategy together, and then we end with a workshop time. So workshopping is a creative writing term. It sounds somewhat like a writing workshop, and I think the two things feel somewhat similar. So those of us that are writing teachers that use a writing workshop model, we do some lessons ourselves, and then kids do some writing as well. What we're going to do together is what excuse me, creative writers call workshopping. And so workshopping is where a poet or a creative writer gets to put their writing out in front of a live audience. How rarely do we get to really do that, like to really see what people are going to do with your writing? So a poet or creative writer gets to put their piece of writing out in front of an audience, and then that live group of people, like we have right here, will comment on it. They'll share things that they think about it, suggestions that they'd make. And here's the trick. As the person who's presenting your writing, you're not allowed to talk because as adult writers, if you're allowed to talk, what tends to happen, and I'm guilty of this too, is you try to defend yourself. You try to say, well, actually, I meant, well, actually this, well, actually that. So it is an exercise in quiet humility. It is an exercise in just like calm and peace. But it allows you to hear what people are doing as they interact with the words on the page that you created, so that you can ask yourself, do I want them to feel that way? Did I want them to think that way? Is there something I could change about that? It gives you really immediate reading feedback. So for this first time out, we're not going to put anyone on the spot. Instead, we're going to use a published poet's poem. So my apologies or hooray to Ruth Schwartz that we're about to talk about you and you're not here. But it's a way that we can practice in a safe way, practicing what the strategy feels like, so that we can then get to know it, so we can then use it ourselves later. So if you have it handy, those of you who are tweeting at home too, make sure that you have your copy of The Swan at Edgewater Park in front of you. If you need it, you can go to our blog, community.theeducatorcollaborative.com /blog, and that's where you'll find a link to this poem. With the poem, it helps if you already have some compliments jotted down, some questions jotted down, some considerations jotted down, and we actually will go through these together. So we're going to take each one of these three things as a step, and so we're going to practice together doing this. If you are on Twitter, continue to tweet. I see a bunch of them are coming through still. You can use hashtag #TwitterPoets, and you can share your own compliments, questions, and considerations off of this poem too. Okay, so to get started, we typically will put the poem up on the screen if it's ours that was written. We don't own this poem, though, and Ruth isn't here with us. So I'm just going to read a little tiny bit of it, so those of you at home, if you don't have it in front of you, can just hear a little of what the voice sounds like. Then the rest of us will then look at the rest of the poem, and we'll start talking off of it. So I'm going to read just a little bit, then I'll give a demonstration of a type of compliment you might give, and then I'll turn it over to my friends here in Teacher Poets and those of you on Twitter as well. So we'll start with compliments, then questions, then considerations. So The Swan at Edgewater Park, it was selected for Poetry 180, which is a great website that Billy Collins and others helped to put together through the Library of Congress, and it gives 180 poems, a poem a day for every day of school, and it's intended for an American high school audience, though some poems I think are great for other ages. Some are a little more appropriate to older kids. So here's just the beginning of The Swan at Edgewater Park by Ruth L. Schwartz. The Swan at Edgewater Park. Actually, I'll read a little at the beginning and then a little at the end so you can hear where the turn happens. The Swan at Edgewater Park. Isn't one of your prissy rich people's swans. Wouldn't be at home on some pristine pond. Chooses the whole stinking shoreline, candy wrappers, condoms, and its tidal fringe. Prefers to curve its muscular, slightly grubby neck into the body of a great lake, swilling whatever it is that swans swill. Then, as the poem goes on, a turn happens where the swan is compared to someone, but not like Laurie at 16, when everything was possible. No, more like Lori at 27, smoking away her days off in her dirty kitchen, and then explains a little about Lori, and it ends with this. Or the boyfriend who doesn't know yet that she's going to leave him. He's a runty little guy and drinks too much, and it's not his kid anyway, but he loves her. He really does. He loves them both. That's the kind of swan this is. So if you have the copy of the poem, you can read all of it for yourself. So when we're workshopping, the poet would read the poem themselves first and then get quiet while the rest of us talk about them. So now we're going to practice talking about them. So we'll do that in these 3 steps. So step 1 is to compliment. So here's the place where you can say things that you really love about this poem. So now we get to have a little bit of a love fest. So I'm going to share one, and then I'll turn it over to all of you here online with me, or if you're on Twitter, feel free to do that too. So things that I love. One thing that I really love is the times where she does a little flip. So like the line that I just read, he's a runty little guy and he drinks too much and it's not his kid anyway, but he loves her, he really does, he loves them both. I love how throughout this poem she gives us something that feels kind of like, ugh, and then flips it on us. You know, she gives us something that we're like, oh, that's a terrible, like in this case, I'm like, oh, bad guy. And then all of a sudden you love him again. You know, like there's something about him that you really love. So I love how she does that throughout this poem. So I turn it over to all of you, lines that you love, other things that you love about this poem, and I'll bring in some tweets too.
Yeah, I also love those little flips, and especially halfway through the poem when there's the line, beauty isn't the point here. Then after all the description of the trash and the stinking shoreline, then it kind of flips it. And I love the little semicolon just kind of makes you pause and really think about it. And it almost feels as though they're speaking to someone, and it just, you know, makes me wonder more about the speaker and who the poem is addressed to. And I thought that part was really interesting.
I love that. And hold your question for now. But I love that too. Beauty isn't the point here. And I hadn't noticed that before. It's semicolon. Other things.
I love how concrete images. I'm very visual, so I love how she, like the line about the stinking shoreline, candy wrappers, condoms, and its title fringe. It goes to what you were saying about the contrasting, because it does make you like, ugh, gross. I just love those images.
What I like about it is the humor, you know, the prissy rich peoples run together as one word so that they're not really even human anymore. Not really people at all, they're different. And the swilling, whatever it is, swans swill, in this image of the Chardonnay of algae, and the line, look at that big duck. Like that. That's nice. Yeah.
I love it too. While Clevelanders walk by saying, look at that big duck. I love that too. Go ahead.
Sorry, is that the amalgamation of the humor with this kind of very sad feeling that you get when you read the poem. And then at the very end, I like the way she sort of blends the voices, so you can't really tell at first read who's speaking. Is it Lori, or is it the renty little guy, or is it some combination of both of them? I thought that was really clever how she ran it, kind of those two voices in together.
Here's Christy from online is saying, I like how the title becomes the first line of the poem. Yeah, I loved that too. The swan at Edgewater Park isn't one of your prissy rich people's swans. So let's pause with compliments, though if more come up, feel free to bring them in. So our first step is read, and then after that, to compliment, so to say the things that we really, really love. The next are questions. And so with questions, we're going to raise things that we're wondering about. So things that we maybe aren't so clear on, or some of them have already come up a bit too, of you're wondering about the voice, you're wondering about this, you're wondering about that. The trick with questions is, number one, we still want to say the questions with love. So we still want to say things that we're wondering in a way that helps the poet know that we appreciate the work that they've done and want to help them think about this. We also want to be honest, though. So when you give a question, don't feel like you have to dance around it a little bit, because the reality is it's you as the reader, it's your experience. So one trick you can do if you want to give a question with love but also be honest is to preface it with something like, well, as a reader, I'm wondering, you know, or as someone who's reading, I really liked this, but then I wondered why. So you can preface it with as a reader, or you can put something that you liked against something that you were wondering about. So I'll give you an example of that. One thing that I really liked, that I said earlier, is I like how there are these kind of like comparisons that happen throughout. The question that I had is I almost missed, I got the turn as I was reading, but I almost missed the line right after beauty isn't the point here, and then it says, of course the swan is beautiful. I almost missed that, of course the swan is beautiful line, and so my question is, like, does it belong there, or could there have been something else that went in its way? Because I loved when Lori came in, and I think I wondered how she came in, like where did the transition happen? I actually had to reread it to catch where that transition happened. So for me, I wonder why that line is there, or if there's a different transition that could happen there, because I as a reader felt a little bit lost. So I turn it over to you, Teacher Poets, other questions that you have, and of course keep tweeting online too.
Actually, Chris, I was thinking about the same kind of area of the poem, and just about the decision making when it comes to line breaking. And I kind of wondered in that same area, beauty isn't the point here, semicolon, of course, the swan is beautiful. And I wondered in that area if a line break change might have drawn my attention a little bit more to beauty isn't the point here. And then the swan is beautiful is set apart on its own, but I feel like that, of course, on that same line, as a reader, I wonder if that sort of made me miss that first part of the line.
One of the things that I wonder about this poem is if Laurie is being compared to the swan immediately after that line, the swan is beautiful. I'm kind of wondering in what sense she is beautiful, because I see the beauty in Boyfriend, and I see the beauty in the swan, and even in the Great Lakes with its grubby trash, but I'm not seeing much that I like about Laurie, so that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I was initially kind of tripped up by the two isn't and wouldn't. I don't know why that really. It was like a double negative, and I had to it wasn't bad. I just I loved all the images, but the two contractions, I don't know why it tripped me up.
Any other thoughts? While we're doing some more thinking, some thoughts from online. Rebecca's pointing out that Cleveland is an interesting choice of a city. They're close, she says, they're close enough to, oh, I just lost your point. Oh, here it is. They're close enough to rural that they should be able to recognize not a duck. And then Betsy's saying that she also loves that line, beauty isn't the point here, and how it just stands out kind of right in the middle of the poem, that she loved that too. And then Rebecca has one more question. That's the kind of swan. She's wondering, is it Laurie is the kind of swan that they're describing, or is it the relationship that the swan's being compared to? She'd like a little more clue there too. I think that's a really interesting point. Is maybe a bit more of a nudge as to what the swan's compared to. Any other questions? Okay, so then let's move to considerations. So considerations are our opportunity to give some ideas to the poet of things that they might consider while they're revising. And so some of those fall right in line with compliments or questions that we already gave. So it might be, I really love this about the poem and I'd love to see more of it. Or, you know, earlier when I said I wondered about that line, I wonder if it could go here, there, or somewhere else. Considerations, though, could also be larger things. So it could be, you know, I almost wonder if there's two poems here, or I wonder if the speaker should be someone different, or, you know, there could be large things. The big thing to keep in mind with considerations is that we're not the writer of the poem. The poet is the writer of the poem. So when we're offering these considerations, number one, it's helpful to use kind of tentative language to say, I wonder if it could be that, possibly, so it doesn't sound like it's a definitive, it has to be fixed this way. But also to realize that sometimes giving a couple different options are even more helpful than just one. So instead of saying, for example, I'll give an example. I'll go back to that line that I had pointed out of course, the swan is beautiful. I could say, I was wondering about the placement there. Maybe one, so I'm being tentative, maybe one consideration is, I don't know, breaking it into stanzas. Maybe start a new stanza where that starts. I don't know if that would disrupt the flow of the whole poem, though, but that might be one. Or maybe it becomes its own line. Or maybe that line itself is just broken into a couple lines, just some way to maybe visually have that, of course, the swan is beautiful, but not like Lori, stand out a bit more. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm trying to like give a suggestion and maybe even just a couple of different suggestions around that. This is one of the times that as the poet, you'll find yourself like writing down tons of notes because they're all really good ideas. It's also important to know that as the poet, you don't have to use any of them if you don't want to. So it helps to write things down, but then it's up to you. You're the one who's writing, so you can decide what feedback matches what you'd like to do, what feedback is maybe things you just want to save for another poem. So I turn it over to you, Twitter, and to you, teacher poets. What are some considerations that you could offer to this poet?
I think I'll say something. In the beginning of the poem, as I was reading it the first time, and this is not something that I had mentioned earlier, but I really liked the way that she played a lot with word choice and language. Somebody, I think, mentioned the fact that she ran together rich peoples into one word. But then it was kind of almost fun to read, pristine ponds, swan swill, and even that line, Chardonnay of algae with a bouquet of crud. When I read that the first time, I actually purposely mispronounced algae to match up with Chardonnay of algae with bouquet of crud, because it sounded fun to me. And as I got lower in the poem, I felt like I had fewer opportunities to play around like that as I was reading the poem. And so I kind of wondered if maybe, I'm not sure if it was done on purpose as a writer, if she did it on purpose or not. But that might be something that, as a writer, I would consider. Because I felt like, as a reader, as I was reading it in the beginning, I was having fun with it, and then I sort of lost that fun toward the end because I couldn't find those opportunities with word choice and language.
As you're thinking, poets, I'll bring in Christy saying, as a reader, I want more details about Lori. I wonder if there's a way to do that and keep the balance between Swan and Lori. And I remember one of you had mentioned that earlier too. If like you kind of want to know what was beautiful about her, what are the things that we should like some more, other considerations.
Is this? I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. I actually love that the beauty in Lori is her possibility. I think maybe that's why she was just making it simple with her, that everyone has that beauty with, but it's what happens when people's expectations are such. Like the swan is a duck to these people because that's what their expectations are. And I love that she's saying that the beauty in Lori is it's just the possibility. So maybe that's why she just keeps it really simple about Lori.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a good point when you think about it, of like the gross shoreline has so much description, and the boyfriend, has so much description, and all we get is that she had so much possibility when she was 16 and not so much anymore. We get a little tiny bit about her, but not a lot. The other thing, just meta to point out, is that's what I love about a workshopping situation, is that you can get multiple perspectives. So I think it was really, really helpful that you said, well, actually, I don't know if I agree with that. I kind of think this other thing. And I think that's important because, again, as the poet, so once some of you start doing this next week and then the week after, as the poet, you want as many perspectives as possible so you can decide for yourself what's worth working on. Because if I were Ruth right now, I could then think for myself, yeah, those are two interesting things to weigh. Do I want to show more of Lori, or is that not as important to me as something else? And so those multiple perspectives would help with that. And I just dropped a lamp behind me, so that would help too. So how about one more, if anyone has one?
I was going to say that like Suzanne, I would have like to have seen some of the humor coming out again towards the end, because this is a very sad poem, especially after the turn. It ends up being quite sad. You know, the way Laurie is so inactive. Even the boyfriend's doing something. He's washing the car. The swan is doing something. Laurie's the only one just smoking away her days. I found that so sad. If there'd been a little bit of that humor, I guess in the last line there is some. That's the kind of swan this is.
Mm-hmm.
But it would have been nice to have some more of that verbal humor and the images that were quite funny towards the beginning, just to kind of balance out that turn a little bit.
Right, right. And I wonder too, and again, there's like multiple perspectives on it, is you're right, when you're first reading, it's a poem you laugh out loud about. It's like Sue, you had brought up the bouquet of crud. And then once you get past it, now when you look back at that first part, though there's still some silliness in the language, now at least when I reread it, now it's like now it's really dark. It's like, oh wow, it's not just this like silly things that are happening to this swan. It's like a swan that's in junk right now. Just a couple thoughts from online. We have Rebecca, who's saying that the phrase, actually you just brought this up too, Leanne, the phrase washing the car out back, she's saying it kind of breaks up thoughts about why Laurie is going to leave him, and so she wondered if maybe that the washing the car should move to a different place. And then Christy brings up a really great point that I think is a good one to end on here. She says, listening to others question the poem and workshopping it, she said she feels like she's understanding the poem better. And so this process isn't just helping with writing, it's helping with reading too. And I feel like I'm having that same experience, like the point that came up earlier, I think it was Jancy, where you brought up that beauty isn't the point here, semicolon. I had missed the semicolon, and I love semicolons. I mean, it's like kind of strange how much I like them. So now I'm like obsessing over it. I'm looking at where it is halfway through, what it's doing to separate. Like I'm like, that's a brilliant semicolon right there. So yeah, I think that's very true, that in the process of workshopping, we're helping ourselves be better writers for readers, but I think it also changes the way that we read too. So we're getting to the end of our time here, guys, which is exciting and sad all at the same time. But here are some things to think about for next time. So next time we will be workshopping again, and we already have 2 volunteers. We'll have an original poem from Leanne and Sue, which you can look forward to. Those of you joining us online, you can look forward to being posted Wednesday on our blogs. You'll get a chance to read those and prep those in the same way, compliments, questions, and considerations. Next week's strategy is tell it like it is not. So today was tell it like it is. Next week we'll be working on tell it like it is not. And I won't give you any spoilers. We'll come to that. So to prepare for next time, the writing invitation. So the writing invitation will be to do what we've been doing today. I invite all of you who are watching, and of course we teacher poets, and especially Leanne and Sue, will be practicing some writing like it is. So perhaps writing some entries and then turning those into poems, especially focusing on how to not be too mysterious, how to try to just come right out and say the things that we want to say and then build some poetry around that. So that's your writing invitation. If you're online, please join us we'd love to have you on our Google Plus community page, and that's where you could post some links to your own poems. You're also welcome to leave them as comments at the blog as well. Then I will post on Wednesday these 2 poems as mentor poems to read for Tell It Like It Is Not. When you read both of these, I think you'll love them, but you also will see what I'm aiming for here. So Tracy K. Smith and Tony Hoagland, Tracy K. Smith's poem, Don't You Wonder Sometimes, and Tony Hoagland's poem, Jet. You're welcome to find those on Google yourselves right now if you'd like, but I will post those on Wednesday for you too. And you'll see in both of those poems, they are being very clear and specific, but they also are doing some kind of magical writing too, and that's what we'll work on next time. And then of course next time our workshop prep will be working on those original poems together. So today was April 11th. We will see you next week, April 18th. join us at our community page. Be sure to stop by the blog on Wednesday to check out the next assignment. A big, big, huge thanks to all of you teacher poets for joining us live here. Thank you, Margaret, for coming back to give us your support and words of wisdom as we began. And thanks to all of you out in Twitter land who have been tweeting along with us. I still see tweets coming through too. To me, the best, well, there's so many good things about this, but one of the best parts about this is we're all going to go write poems right now, and that feels really exciting. I never make time for that. So happy writing, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next Saturday.